Come see us on tour in Dallas, Austin, Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, New York, Atlantic City, Levittown, Cohost, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for the link for the cheapest tickets. The United States government is in the business of censoring. And what is that all about? Remember when they did all the censoring? Remember, it's all comes from USAID. In fact, USAID... the key is they try to get people's advertisers to abandon them. So if you're doing journalism that's harmful to the establishment, they will then do hit pieces on you to try to get advertisers to flee you, like they did with the adpocalypse for YouTube. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they did that to me. So the USAID was sponsoring a thing called Vox Media Ukraine. Vox Media Ukraine did all the stories and did a video about me, trying to call me a conspiracy theory and how I'm spreading misinformation to try to get me. That it worked on Jackson Hinkle. They got
Right.
Jackson Hinkle banned from YouTube, but it didn't work on me. But here's Mike Pence is going to talk about that, and it's about, I don't know, 10 minutes long. Let's watch.
USAID has a formal disinformation program focused on getting advertisers to cut off revenue to misinformation sites and purveyors of misinformation. And I have seen, they have this formally published. In fact, my organization, Foundation for Freedom Online, even published the formal disinformation primer in February 2021, 1 month after Biden took office, where in a 97-page USAID disinformation program memo, 31 times they mention the word advertisers as being necessary to kill the revenue to any social media site or any social media account or any independent web page that spreads misinformation.
So that's what happened to Jackson Hinkle. And they tried to do that to me, but that happened they did it to Russell Brand.
Mm-hmm.
That's the game.
It goes way back. Remember Stupid Gamergate?
Yeah.
Which, to Aaron Mate's credit, he thought was a harassment campaign against women because that's what they spread around about it.
Yeah.
He was really complaining about corporations, but it was USAID behind the whole thing the whole time.
So that just keep that in mind. So when you see someone being discredited like Tucker Carlson, someone being discredited like Russell Brand, Jackson Hinkle, me, the Gray Zone, Glenn Greenwald, they're trying to scare away their advertisers. That's all a plan from the CIA, or as we better know it, USAID. Here we go.
Yeah.
So USAID is contorting the economics of the entire news industry in order to get platforms to censor lest they go economically bankrupt. And remember, this is the major threat to Elon still to this day, but particularly these advertiser boycotts.
So that's why they're all of a sudden turned on Elon Musk, and they would have turned on Zuckerberg, except Zuckerberg folded, and he's going to tell you about that.
Which crushed the ability. This is why they had to turn to subscriptions and they had to make this $8 a month, $12 a month type thing because of all the ad boycotts. And again, USAID is a formal program to coordinate that in a whole of society fashion. Getting back to Elon's uniqueness. So for a couple of things, as a triple-digit billionaire, he may be more insulated from these kinds of whole of society encirclement economic pressure tactics that someone like Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey had tolerance for. They were only double-digit billionaires, or Zuckerberg. Whereas as a triple-digit billionaire, that actually may be robust enough to resist that. Getting back to this Mark Zuckerberg letter, in 2019, Mark Zuckerberg was making public speeches saying that he thought censorship had gone too far on Facebook. That was 2019.
I remember.
But then he got hit with a very interesting boycott that was called #ChangeTheTerms. And it basically was economically coercing Facebook to change the terms of its terms of service, effectively to ban Trump supporters and Brexit supporters and anyone in Europe who was supporting a right-wing populist party there. And Facebook lost $60 billion in market cap in 48 hours under this boycott. And so Facebook folded like a lawn chair and gave them everything they asked for because $60 billion was enough to break Zuckerberg's back. At the same time, there's
who paid for Change the Terms?
Oh, that's how many hours you have.
How about 60 seconds? Just bottom line it for us.
I mean, nominally, it was the ADL and Color of Change under this kind of hate speech idea, but it was
the ADL.
They're the best.
The Anti-Defamation League.
Joined by dozens of USAID-funded, U.S. State Department-funded NGOs, civil society institutions, who are all creating the base of that. So nominally...
So let's keep that in mind. So as Christian Parenti explained on our show, that the CIA got together with NGOs like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, those type, and then they do the bidding to make sure they that we don't come together along class lines and an economic basis to thwart and oppose the oligarchy, that we keep fighting over feminism, we fight over abortion, we fight over trans issues and gender blockers and bathrooms and DEI and white supremacy. That's the goal. And that's what he's explaining to you right there. They get all these NGOs to do their dirty work for them because they fund them.
Yeah. Hey, fun fact, you know who invented the term pseudoscience that people are fond of saying? The Rockefeller Foundation.
That's
they
right.
came up with that term all these things, this is an ongoing plan from before you're born.
That's right.
You had these, ADL color of change, and it's about hate speech on social media. But the buffering substructure for it were all these U.S. government intermediaries in country after country. The free and open internet, unfiltered alternative news, the rise of citizen journalists, the rise of citizens in those countries who have larger voices than CIA-backed media, than USAID-funded media, than State Department-funded media, has meant that the State Department has lost control of those countries. And what happened was, after 2016, the technology and the networks were established to be able to add a new toolkit to American diplomacy, which is diplomacy by censorship. And we have formal government programs at the State Department dedicated to getting foreign countries to pass domestic censorship laws to stop the rise of right-wing populist parties in those countries. I'm going to say that again. We have formal government programs at the State Department whose job is to lobby foreign countries and pressure foreign countries to pass censorship laws to stop the rise of domestic populist groups. So you have truckers in America whose income tax is going to pay foreign governments to censor their citizens. This is the sort of schizophrenia right now of America.
We're becoming the Soviet Union, which exported poison around the world for all those years. I really felt like the United States was, the bulwark against that. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm trying to reassess. What is true now is we're doing what they did. We're sowing chaos and tyranny around the world. It's like I am so heartbroken to see this.
Well, it's amazing you say that, because as someone who's sort of present at creation in terms of watching this all get established and spending my whole life monitoring it and chronicling it, they were very aware of that when they were setting this up. And when I say they, I mean NATO, the US State Department, the UK Foreign Office, after the 2016 election and after Brexit. And they began this whole consensus-building quest about how to get all the relevant stakeholders from the government, from the private sector, from civil society, and from the media to all come together and create this whole of society censorship coalition, whole of society counter misinformation coalition, technically they call it. But they were very aware of that what they were doing was exactly what they accused Russia and China of doing, intensely aware. They were very careful in establishing it, according to this idea that what we will do is we will be able to essentially have plausible deniability, but even though we're funding it and we're directing it and we are pressuring everyone to join this censorship coalition. And so this is how you had tens of millions of dollars from the U.S. State Department funding the private sector pop-up censorship mercenary firms, funding the civil society institutions, the universities, the censorship activists, the NGOs, the nonprofits, the researchers, and also on the media side, and all these U.S.-funded, USAID-funded media outlets, all pushing for censorship. And there's an elegant structure to it, which is that the government...
So that's why it was wild to see journalists be the loudest voice for censorship. Why? Because they were being funded to do that.
Is the civil society institutions to do essentially CIA work against our own citizens. This is why there's so many CIA analysts at these censorship universities, the censorship labs. They'll call them disinfo labs. At 60 plus U.S. universities, all funded by the U.S. government. They do,
and I assume on cable television too. They're everywhere on all the channels.
Yes. DHS actually onboards media organizations into its counter disinformation work. And again, because media is the fourth quadrant in the whole society framework, and it's government, private sector, civil society, and media all aligned like a magnet to create the censorship outcomes, so that so there's no holes in the Titanic. No one can resist it. No one can stop it. This is the prop. And it was so effective until Elon Musk essentially burst that bubble, and until they went a little bit too far with the Disinformation Governance Board, and finally a certain faction within the Republican Party woke up and was able to exert some pressure through the House and Jim Jordan in November 2022. We selectively promote either free speech or censorship depending on what's most advantageous for political control in any particular country. So, for example, if Bolsonaro were to have rose back to power in Brazil, have no doubt about it, free speech would be back on the menu, and Bolsonaro would be accused of censorship, over, jaywalking, on a random street corner, and we would be pumping up through NGOs and university centers and journalists on payroll. We'd be pumping $100 million into Brazil's free speech economy in order to create anti-Bolsonaro sentiment.
That's right.
But one of the things beginning, and I come back to this Brazil
Can I
case.
just ask you to pause one last time? One of the things I've learned from you over the past couple of years, I've learned a lot from you, but one big picture idea that I didn't fully appreciate till I listened to you carefully was that our foreign policy drives our domestic policy.
There's no such thing as domestic policy.
Exactly.
Every country,
I didn't understand. I grew up in a world where there was the foreign policy and like you overthrow Mossadegh or whatever. Maybe that's good for America. You don't even think about it. We're fighting the Soviets. It's not a problem because we are an island of freedom here in the United States. And your reporting and analysis suggests exactly what you just said. There is no domestic policy. Everything that happens in this country is an outgrowth, a function of our management of the world.
Yes. There's no such thing as domestic policy because every country's domestic policy is another country's foreign policy. Whatever you do in the United States or whatever any foreign country, a foreign country wants to change its labor laws. Well, guess what? That impacts the bottom line of U.S. corporations who employ labor pools there. A foreign country wants to nationalize its graphite industry. Well, guess what? Now America can't make pencils. Every internal policy of every other country on earth impacts the bottom line of some U.S. national champion. Now, how the State Department defines national interest is essentially the college of corporations and financial firms that are U.S. national champions. So, for example, if something happens, if Georgia or Azerbaijan does something that impacts the bottom line of ExxonMobil or Chevron or Halliburton, that becomes a State Department priority in order to protect U.S. national interests against this nationalization law that's happening in Georgia or Azerbaijan. And it's the same thing with every industry. And so I do want to get back to this sort of exporting the First Amendment concept that was such a big part of American statecraft. I think there's almost no better example of this than what happened with the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which is the main censorship artery of the U.S. State Department. It also works with a million of these censorship NGOs and USAID and this whole network. It was set up by Rick Stengel. And Rick Stengel, would you say that his job was to export the First Amendment, former managing editor of Time magazine. And when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, the guy whose job was to export the First Amendment wrote an op-ed, I believe in the Washington Post, effectively calling for an end to the First Amendment, that it needs to mirror what Europe and other countries have.
And then he wrote a book making the same case.
Right. But again, this is the guy who was the Undersecretary of Public Affairs. This is
a very evil man, Rick Stengel.
Well, the point that I'm trying to make here is the free speech absolutist who was in charge of U.S. government projection of free speech. All it took was one election for the entire diplomacy architecture that this principle of free speech was based on to get completely bottomed out. All it took was Donald Trump getting elected for arguably 200 years of a First Amendment principle and 70 years of this principle of exporting the First Amendment.
And they wanted to export the First Amendment so that they can fund journalists to push their narrative to get to coup other governments and control the politics in that country. So that's why they pushed free speech. And then Trump gets elected and Brexit happens and they immediately flip and say, you know what? No, maybe free speech isn't so good. That's what he's.
We're going to lose total control. We're going to lose total control. Yeah.
To be entirely discarded because it was leading to the wrong kinds of people being elected.
There you go.
So there you go.
Who's in charge of that? Who's in charge of saying who the right kind of people are? Because everybody's a sucking up to the opinion of whoever's in charge, but I don't get to know who it is.
Right. So that implies that Trump wasn't in control. He's not, just like Chuck Schumer said. He's being very dumb to go against the intelligence community because they're the ones who actually run everything. The people at USAID, it's the corporates, the conglomeration of corporations who actually, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, they actually work for. And who are, and just like
important oligarchical families, it's just some very important families. Frank Herbert, the road dude, had a great saying about bureaucracy. When it's unfettered, becomes an aristocracy. And he goes, and here's your proof that it's happening. Are they generationally passing the power of the bureaucracy onto their kids? Yeah, we've been in it for quite some time.
So that's how things actually work. That's how they get people's, and they target your advertising. That's that. And then they push free speech in other countries so that they can then go in and give hundreds of millions of dollars to create media centers. They did that in Ukraine. That's what Vox Media is in Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's what that is. So then they push out 100% propaganda to control the narrative, get the people who are telling the truth, get them defunded, get them discredited. They did it that's what happened with Russell Brand. That's what happened with Jackson Hinkle. That's what happened with Matt Taibbi. That's what happened with Tucker Carlson. They did the same thing with me. And Zuckerberg went along with it. In 2019, he said, we have to stop censoring. And then they were like, no, you will censor more. And they cost him $60 billion like that. And he was like, oh, okay, turns out I guess I will censor more. And he's making the case that Elon Musk is insulated to a greater extent from that because he's a triple-digit billionaire. And that's why
I have to be triple digits.
And that's why the liberal establishment and everybody in the news and everybody that I know in Hollywood went from loving Elon Musk to hating him at the snap of a finger.
That's right.
Because
he was an Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, everybody loved Elon. He's making electric cars to save the environment, you guys. They loved him. And then boom, just like how they loved Donald Trump. They loved Donald Trump. He was on the cover of every magazine. He was a guest on every late night talk show. He was the host of Saturday Night Live. They loved him. They gave him his own network television show. They gave him Emmy nominations. They loved him. And then he won. And then they were like, he's a racist. He's a white supremacist. He's a dictator. He's Hitler. He's Stalin. Just like that. And it was ubiquitous. Ubiquitous.
Well, because you suck up to move up in the pyramid. So everybody's like, oh, start sucking up till we hate him. Everybody starts sucking up to that.
And the best propaganda is the propaganda that people don't know is propaganda. Americans don't know they're propagandized to hate Elon Musk. They don't know they're propagandized to hate Russia. They don't know they're propagandized to support the Ukraine war. They didn't know they were propagandized to turn on their neighbor over vaccines during COVID. They didn't know they were propagandized to hate their neighbor over masks, over questioning where the virus. They didn't know. They don't know. They think that's just the way it is because I'm seeing it everywhere. I see it in Rolling Stone magazine. I see it on CNN. I see it in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe. I see it everywhere. It's everywhere. It's on every radio station. Remember, 6 companies own every radio station, television station, newspaper, movie company. Every magazine, everything is owned by one of 6 companies. And they're all controlled by the blob. What's the blob? The blob is the intelligence community, USAID, the CIA, the FBI. That's the blob. All the NGO, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller
NATO.
Foundation. That's the blob. And then Facebook becomes part of the blob because they knuckle under and do the bidding of the blob by censoring actual journalism. And discrediting them like they discredited me. So this is how, and so now that, isn't it funny that now Trump is elected, we're finding this out? Now do you know why they pushed back against him so hard? They didn't want something like this happening. And now
the only surprise is USAID, how big it was. Every other thing, everyone's been complaining about it for over a decade.
Yeah.
Over a decade, everyone's been complaining about this horse shit. But why didn't it go away? Because normally political correctness goes away every 6 or 7 years. It's like a cycle. But this time it didn't go away. Well, because it's being underwritten by your taxes and the CIA.
That's right. It's being underwritten. Yeah. And so that's why all of a sudden people think that they actually, they think DEI, like they thought of it. They think that trans activism, like they thought of it. Like when Cornel West comes on and says, my trans brothers, he's doing the bidding of the blob because he's internalized that propaganda because he doesn't realize he's been propagandized.
I told you what Kyle Kinane said to me last time I seen him at Mothership. We were talking about something, and he goes, you know too much stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess I do. I guess I do.
Why can't you just stay? What? Don't do your own research. Why don't you just stay ignorant and have a nice career? And have your
like such. He didn't even say it to mean anything bad by it. He was just like, that's a thing someone has in their head. You know, like it's just mind blowing to me. And I keep harping on mind control. People act like it's some kind of fantastical thing. Well, are you living on a different planet than me? Because I'm watching it right and left, and I'm watching everybody go, hey, what is this? Hey, this doesn't make any sense. No, it doesn't, does it? Almost like something's at work causing people not to be able to think.
So things are crazier than the Brave New World and 1984 combined. They're even worse than that.
It's more, yeah. It's
And
Brave
that's
New
why
World,
that's why they had to demonize and make it toxic to be a conspiracy theorist, because they're running conspiracies constantly.
It couldn't be more obvious, the globalist thing that Alex Jones would say, the New World Order. Well, again, Alex Jones didn't invent that. That was all of them in that gang, the George H.W. and Clinton. They all gave Kerry. They all talked about the New World Order, right? So that's your conspiracy. Who's part of this global thing for a global government? It used to be Bible crazy ago. They want a one world government.
Yep.
No, they do. They all do. They're open about it. It's not a conspiracy. It's happening in front of you. What are you talking about?
Come see us on tour in Dallas, Austin, Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, New York, Atlantic City, Levittown, Cohost, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for the link for the cheapest tickets.